Hello and welcome. This is Jack Bosch speaking, and welcome to another episode of the Forever Cash Life Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about all things cash flow and real estate. And today we're going to go into a little bit more different subject about conversions, like about self-storage, about SBA loans, and all kinds of things that we haven't really talked ever about. So stay tuned, and we get started right away.
Welcome to the Forever Cash Life Real Estate Investing Podcast with your hosts, Jack and Michelle Bosch. Together, let's uncover the secrets to building true wealth through real estate and living a purpose-driven life.
All right, and here we are. So our guest today is Scott Krone. Scott is the managing partner of, I have to put on my glasses to actually read his company name, of Coda Management Group, right? Coda Management Group. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful, Scott. So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us what you do. Tell us a little bit of your background. We like to jump into things right away, but just give us a little bit of a background of what you guys do. How did you get into that line of business, and just those kind of things.
Well, upon graduating from college, I decided to pursue a master's in architecture, and it was a new program that you didn't have to have a bachelor's degree in architecture. You could just go right to your master's. And so it was a 3.5-year program. And I was fortunate enough to get connected to a professor that was also a real estate developer, architect, and builder. And so I worked for him for 6 years, 3 while I was in school, and then I continued that. And so I began really immediately involved in real estate because he was one of the few professors that was practicing as a developer as well. And so since my background was non-architectural based, when I was working in the office, he had me doing office, development stuff. And when I went to school, I was doing the design stuff. And so I got the best of both worlds there.
Okay, very good. So now today, what is your main lines of business?
Well, we have 2 businesses. One is Coda Design Build, which is our retail client-based driven work where clients hire us to develop properties for them. We just finished up a church, the Church of the Redeemer, where they've been searching for a property for 20 years, and we helped them acquire it. We got them the zoning, the entitlements. We got them through the financing. We did the design. We did the build. So we really helped them throughout the entire process. And then the second business that we have is Coda Management Group, which is our investment side, where we're actively at this point in time taking warehouse or other commercial buildings that are non-performing and converting them into self-storage facilities.
All right, wonderful. And where are you mainly located, and where are you mainly operating?
Well, we're located in just north of the city of Chicago, but we are operating throughout the Midwest. So right now we're in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Ohio. And currently we're looking in the Michigan area and also Kentucky, and as far out as North Carolina. Those are the areas that we're currently looking.
All right, very good. So that's covers a good part of the country. Okay, so walk us through some of your typical kind of, like I mentioned in the intro that we're going to talk about conversions. So what do you convert? What do you typically look for? How does the process typically works?
So we're looking for buildings that are between, let's just say 70 and 110, 120,000 square feet in urban settings that are either non-performing or underperforming or not being utilized to its efficient, right, which I guess is underperforming. And then we convert them into a Class A self-storage facility. And Class A means fully enclosed, climate controlled, and has the lockers inside the building compared to what is known as Class B or C. Not that they're in bad neighborhoods, but it's more generational, third generation, where, it's the old self-storage, rows of garage doors that you drive down an aisle, and there's garage doors on both sides, and they may or may not be conditioned. Ours are all in, either large commercial buildings, multiple stories, or, single stories, where you literally can drive your car into the building, the garage door comes down, and then you roll your stuff to your locker.
All right, that's beautiful. Okay, so these are basically they're not like many self-storage facilities are either in, let's say, not the best location sometimes, or they're building mostly, the most new builds are like on this in the path of growth and in the outsides. A lot of that is built there. So yours are right smack often in the city, right?
More times than not. I mean, our one in Milwaukee is not in the heart of downtown. It's more on the, it's still in the city of Milwaukee, but it's outside the downtown area. But the ones in Ohio are, 3 blocks from the center of downtown.
Okay, wonderful. Great. And just out of curiosity, what's your typical customer there? Is like, and especially in those central locations, is that the mom and pop that need a place, or is this more companies?
In those locations, it's probably going to be about 50-50 between residents as well as businesses. And businesses, just need a little bit of extra, storage and square footage to warehouse stuff. And so what we're expecting in both of those locations is a combination of both commercial and residential uses.
Does that change if you go to the outskirts of town?
It does, not necessarily just the outskirts, but the demographics. So we really look, whenever we're considering a property, we study the demographics. And it's not just how many people or how many square foot of lockers there are per person, which are major demographics for us. We look at the income level, and because that dictates what sizes we do, and also how many people are in the area. So we really study the demographics very thoroughly, and that will determine whether or not we go into a community. In fact, I was just having that conversation with a person from a local city that we're working in, and I was making the point that the first and foremost reason we're buying that building is because of the fact that the demographics warrant our use. And if it didn't, there's no way I'm buying that building.
The demographics were in what?
Warrant. If it,
warrant that use.
If we have to have the demand. If the demand is not there.
What's the perfect demographic for you?
Well, we want to, in our setting, we want to be, over 100, 150,000 people within a 3-mile radius. And we want to, it's not so much the type of person, it's how many other lockers are there compared to the number of people. So the metric is 7 square feet of lockers per capita. And if we're above 7 square feet, then we will not even touch it. And, a lot of places out east, Florida, the South Texas, a lot of communities are, around 9 square feet of lockers per capita, which is, very high density of self-storage. The markets that we're going into, we're typically between 1 and 3 square feet per capita.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's a very good analysis. And then you were talking about the drives, that the kind of the demographics drives the sizes. How can you give us a little bit more in more detail on that?
Well, the more affluent the community is, the more desirous to have larger lockers. So we have one community, which is, we have one facility, which is in a very affluent community, and we couldn't rent out the 10 by 10s. But as soon as we converted them to 10 by 20s, then they rented because, they wanted a bigger space, because if they're renovating their house, they want to pull all their furniture out, and then, people would come in and rent 4 or 5 lockers at a time for 9 months to a year.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
The less affluent the community, then the higher the premium for smaller lockers. They're not going to, rent a 20 or 30, 200 or 300 square foot locker. They want to rent a 25, 35, 50 square foot locker. Right.
Okay, that is really good information. So now you take old warehouse buildings. Have you taken office space? Because have you looked into office space? Because, for example, with or not office space, but retail space?
We have, and some of them have been a combination of office and retail. The biggest challenge with the retail is a lot of communities that we're looking at or considering, they don't want to de-zone it from retail into self-storage. And so they really want to hold on to that retail component. But there are examples where a big, car dealership or a big box Kmart, we actually looked at a Lowe's building, which is retail, and we bid on it, and we didn't get the bid. So we have looked at areas that are big box retail as well.
Okay, makes sense. So now that's really cool. So you're taking these buildings, very creative, and I'm looking out the window, and there's a big fat coyote walking by right now, and that's what happens when you live in Arizona.
Well, it happens here in Chicago. We have coyotes right in my community as well.
Oh, wow. Yes.
They just attacked 2 people, unfortunately.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yes. So Again, back to the subject matter here, but that's what happens when we're live, right? So when you see you're converting these deals, which is really cool. Now, how do you typically finance them?
Well, that's where the art of the deal comes in, and we look at the capital stack. And so we have our equity component, obviously, and then we have that's where the next layer is where we get creative. So we've structured it with a combination of either PACE financing, opportunity zones, historic tax credits, and then obviously the debt structure. We have done some mezz loans, but for the most part, we look at predominantly with the PACE financing and the opportunity zones are the major components where we like to offer the creativity to our investors.
All right. So since you're buying in opportunity zones and you're putting a lot of capital into these deals, probably to rebuild them all or restructure to build them out, they probably qualify for a lot of opportunity zones regulations.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the biggest thing is you have to do 50% of what you acquire it for. So typically what we're doing is we're putting in all new HVAC equipment, electrical, fire suppression and lockers. And so those dollar amounts will warrant the qualification for the opportunity zones. And so, on the debt side, we've also used credit unions, SBA loans, and traditional local banks as well to accrue.
So SBA stands out of those, for example. Why SBA over like a local credit union or a local bank or so?
Well, they do work in conjunction with a local bank, and so
sure, of course, yeah.
So the reason why the local banks prefer is because it reduces their risk.
Right.
So if let's just take round numbers. If we're looking at a $5 million loan, and the SBA comes in for it qualifies under the SBA, the local community development center buys that portion of the loan. So the local bank, if it's a $5 million, let's say $3 million is with the local bank, $2 million is through the CDC, which is the SBA. And so from a risk point, the bank makes money by selling it to the federal government, but it also reduces the credit risk. So instead they have a $5 million loan on their books, but their risk exposure is only $3 million. And so they don't have as much risk in play. And so that allows them to continue to leverage more of their deposits to get more loans.
And that makes sense. So now, also you mentioned historical tax credits somewhere in there. You mentioned some tax credit just in flying by. I heard you say something about historical or something about taxes. Can you explain first of all the concept of that? What is that for our listeners?
Well, basically what you're doing is you're taking an asset, a building, and making it into a national park. So our self-storage facility in Milwaukee is, right up there with Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and all the other national parks. So it goes on the historic national park registry, and we can't do that with every building. And I mean, it has to merit.
Self-storage facilities is registered as a national park. Okay,
Yes.
dig into that a little bit more here. Give us a little bit more on that.
So if you want to buy tickets, we'll be selling tickets to come view it for.
Right. Well, you can open this thing. There's going to be interesting stuff in there, right?
Right, exactly. We'll have the park rangers and all that, but it goes through the Department of Natural Resources. And so, each of these programs go under different departments, like PACE's Department of Energy, Opportunity Zones, or the Treasury Department. This is under the Department of Natural Resources. And so the building has to merit it. And there has to be some historic precedence or setting for the building, and there's a point system. And if you don't have enough points, the building won't qualify. So what made our building significant was that it was the first fireproof building in Milwaukee. And when they designed it, they did a lot of ornamentation and decorative detailing, both in the first floor as well as on the exterior facade. And so we had to bring in a consultant to first determine if the building warranted. So conversely, we have a building in Toledo, which is predominantly a masonry brick rectangular box. And, I was having conversations with the city planner where she's like, well, this is historical because it was built before 1950. And I'm like, it's not on the historical national registry. It's not on the state registry. There's nothing historical in character about this building just because it was built before 1950. It doesn't merit it. And
now, do you want it to merit it, or you do not want it to merit it?
In that case, it wasn't an expectation for us. So we went into the deal knowing that it wouldn't do it. So we structured it and acquired it without those assumptions. The one that we were doing in Wisconsin, we knew that it qualified, and it had a decorative clock tower. The lobby was all this mosaic, had these ornamental columns and plinths, and a lot of fancy detail that we were preserving. And so when we go through the process, we've identified the areas that we have to maintain and preserve, and there's specific requirements for that. And so we first had to get qualified by the state, and then the state sends it to the federal government to qualify, and then we have to build it with those terms and then meet those obligations. And the result of that, we get tax credits, which we can either use or we can sell, and we get both state tax credits and federal tax credits.
All right. So, in what percentage of a building, without necessarily having to mention actually dollar figures, but what percentage of the building value do you get in tax credits, or what the percentage of your rehab cost does the tax credits? How do the tax credits work?
They base it upon the total cost of the project. Okay. And so we got credits based upon the total value of the building. And so then they give you then a percentage based upon, what is merited within that building. And so, they look at our total costs and then say, here are the tax values. And then we're able to, for instance, because we did that loan with the SBA, this is a very complex capital stack. We have the equity, we have historic tax credits, and then we have the SBA financing. So we could not sell the federal tax credits because of the fact that we were doing SBA financing. So we're passing those tax credits on to our investors. But on the state side, we're able to sell those because only one investor actually resides in Wisconsin. The rest of us reside outside of Wisconsin. So it's more advantageous for us to sell those state tax credits.
Okay, so you can sell them, but just on the second level then, basically.
Well, you can sell them on the federal too, but when you sell them, you are actually, the way the mechanism works is you have to create another company, and the tax buyer buys 99% of the original LLC, and then the 1% becomes your original entity. Okay, right. So that way that the buyer gets the use or the value of those tax credits. If they weren't 99% of it, then they would have to dilute the value of those tax credits. Okay. So the problem with the SBA is the SBA has to know who the loan is with, and the buyer would not qualify.
Right. Okay. That's starting to get into really more complex, advanced kind of financing structure, which is really, really cool. But we'll leave it at that for now. If anyone interested, by the way, if somebody's interested in learning more about what you do and how you do that, or invest with you or so, how do they contact you?
They can look at our webpage, Coda, CODA, MG, as in managementgroup.com. So CodaMG.com.
CodaMG.com. That's wonderful. Great. So another question I had is, like, one of the in our pre-talk before we started this interview, you talked about that it's actually quite hard nowadays to find true value-added self-storage facilities. And obviously your solution is to find these warehouses and convert them. But why is it hard to find true value-added self-storage facilities?
Well, overall, the market represents 10% of the population. So by nature, the self-storage represents, they're serving 10% of the population.
Okay.
So there's a lot of unmet demand out there. And so where they are, they're performing. So if they're performing assets, then it's hard to find a value add. Okay. So most of the typical value adds are smaller mom and pops who, which would be for, the original generation of self-storage, typical drive up, the garage doors and no heating or air conditioning in them. And they're not fully invested in it. They don't have a professional property manager. They might have up-to-date security, all those sorts of things, or they might have underutilized land. And so those are harder to find just because they're small. And what we do is we're not self-storage operators. We are self-storage developers. Mm-hmm. So when we're done developing them, we retain a national REIT. In our case, we've signed contracts with CubeSmart, and CubeSmart manages our facilities. So it's like when you go up to a McDonald's or a Holiday Inn or a Hilton, you don't really know who owns that business. You just see the name on the door. And so you're going in and you're buying a McDonald's hamburger because it says McDonald's, but you don't actually know who owns that actual location.
Okay, so you own a bunch of them. You don't sell the asset after you develop it, typically, or not right away, right?
Not right away. We lease them up. We get them, stabilized, and then once the value is there, then we'll sell them off to the REITs. And so the REITs are looking for larger facilities. They're not looking for 10, 20,000 square foot facilities. They want to manage 70 to 110,000 square foot facilities.
Right, that makes sense. So you buying them, you're operating, you're not operating them. You're bringing in a branded company that brands it under their name, runs it under their name, and then once they, with their proven processes, fill it up, optimize it, you then go sell the underlying asset to a REIT.
Exactly, and they could be the buyer too. So once they get it stabilized, they might be the buyer.
Yeah, whoever pays the highest price at that point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. Great. So with that said, I want to ask you just a few other questions, and that is like unprepared question. I mean, they're prepared by my side, but you don't know them about them yet. And that is just very simply like, what's the number one business mistake you have made?
Well, I think that the number one business mistake, which was I picked the wrong business partner, and he got involved in some things that were not the most healthy for the business. And as a result of that, it created a lot of, turmoil and stress and financial stress when things were not allocated properly. Let's just say it that way. And so, it has been, long drawn out in court. And but I've worked through those issues. And, obviously, so picking the right partners is a critical component to a healthy business.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more on that. My business partner is my wife. She is as smart as they get and very experienced with finance and so on. So we have a really good partnership on that end. So and we can 100% trust each other, of course, and have been married for 18 years. So great. The other question is like, I'm sure you're probably a reader. So what is one of the more impactful books that you have read in the last year, let's say?
Well, there's two books. They're perhaps related in topic. One is The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Krone, Krohn. So we're not related. And it discusses the Enneagram, the concept of the Enneagram, which is different personality profiles. And the people who created it are these 4th century monks, which were absolute geniuses. And it breaks down everybody into 9 different personality types. And we implemented it throughout our business, in our office, so we all know what our personality types are. And it's not like Myers-Briggs or this or that, but it's when you're healthy, when you're not so healthy in your things and where you draw from. But it alters the way in which we communicate back to one another, the strengths and weaknesses of what we're doing. And he also wrote a book called Chasing Francis, which is about Francis Assisi. And it's a very good reminder of a pilgrimage, if you will, and how we're all on journeys. And it's not necessarily related to business, but it involves businesses and how people approach business and how they approach life. And, it's always, to me, life is about the journey, about the pilgrimage, and ways in which we can continue to grow and evolve and develop. And so that's something that we've always sought to do in our household. Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. So with that, again, go to codamg.com to find out more about you guys. I'm fascinated by your approach. It's different than other guests that we had on the podcast, and I love that because I don't want to have a standard podcast where we just interview all the usual suspects each other, but that we have some very different structures and different kind of approaches to that. So with that said, do you have any last parting words for perhaps our audience that you want to leave us with?
Well, the other thing, just continuing the last topic that we were talking about is look for ways to continue to push yourself. If you're not growing, if you're not learning, then you're stagnant, and stagnant leads to complacency, and complacency leads to getting caught behind. We've been doing this for 25 years, and we have not always been in this realm, but we've been in real estate, but the market has changed, so we've had to adapt and change with it, and we've had to grow and expand. And in each of the challenges that we've faced, I think we've come away from it in a healthier and in a more productive manner. So, keep looking to improve and continue to grow.
Wonderful. I couldn't agree with you that more with that. We call it the law of I forgot it right now, but basically it's a physical law that if you don't actively put energy in it, it's a law of entropy. I think if you don't put physical energy in it, it falls apart. So there's actually no such thing like stagnation. If you think you're stagnating, what you're really doing is you're falling apart and you're regressing. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Keep pushing yourself, keep growing, keep learning. And that's why I love having guests like you on the show, so we can learn different ways to invest in real estate. So with that said, that concludes our show. Thank you very much. And remember to give us a 5-star review on iTunes or give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Share the links with it. Share the podcast so we can reach more people with this message. And with that said, Scott, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Enjoyed this episode? Then make sure you like, subscribe, and post your comments and questions below the video. We're looking forward to hearing from you.